My name is Awinash Bawle. I'm from Detroit, Michigan originally, but I'm of Indian descent. My parents are Indian immigrants. I actually came across working with refugees in kind of a unique way. A friend of my wife and mine had volunteered at a refugee camp on the island of Greece, where most of the Middle Eastern refugees sort of migrate to or gravitate to as they cross the ocean. And she had suggested it to us as an idea because my wife is of Middle Eastern descent. We had spent some time there, and it was part of a larger effort because we were traveling around the world. We had taken some time off from our work in the United States, and we were trying to do social service volunteering or engage in those efforts when and where possible. Last summer, that's the summer of 2016, my wife and I volunteered at a refugee community center, not a camp, I should make that note, at a community center on the island of Lesvos, Greece, where most of the refugees they were predominantly from Syria, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iraq. And there was a smattering from Africa. There weren't any from what is considered, the main part of Asia. And we did it for a month, and that's how we got involved. So we had no real prior experience or experience prior to that in dealing with or engaging with refugees. The refugee community center was it was sort of an abandoned building that was used for other purposes. I mean, abandoned not in that it was dilapidated, but it was used for other standard business purposes, and it was acquired by an umbrella organization in Europe called Borderline, which helps operate social service centers for downtrodden or displaced people. And I think over time it evolved because of the amount of refugee flows coming from the Middle East. They said this is a huge cohort of people that are in dire need of these services. So you differentiate it from the camp, as the camp is purely the living headquarters, or living quarters, pardon me, where the refugees live, where they house them when they come from abroad, where they live. And because of the number of people present and the conditions, they can't actually offer these services directly at the camps. They travel to a community center, which is just a facility that has classrooms, in some cases has some audio-visual equipment, where the refugees receive sort of a range of services. Obviously, they get pro bono legal aid, free legal aid to help them with their legal assimilation and adjudicating their asylum status. They receive courses that range from English language training to local language training, in my case Greek, and they also receive there are childcare services. Sometimes they engage in other classes that relate to their well-being, both physically and mentally, whether it's counseling or yoga or meditation practices, something that helps ease their mind because they've endured so much trauma and stress, and they're grappling with family, displacement and things of that nature. So it's kind of a clearinghouse under one roof, all these different things. But we were informally told a couple of things, that a lot of these children, they either come over solo. I mean, even as minors, their parents send them without any adults accompanying or chaperoning them. Or in some cases, unfortunately, I apologize that I know this is a bit morbid, that they come over, for example, in a boat from Turkey, and the boats, they capsize or somehow they get separated from their parents. And so we were told that because they are refugees and they have voluntarily chosen to migrate and leave their societies and their friends and families behind, they are already with their, by virtue of the fact that they're young and they don't have the maturity by definition as adults, that they're already experiencing detachment. And all the ramifications, the negative ramifications that that occur along with that. And then on top of that, you have this phenomenon where most of the teachers who come to these refugee community centers are volunteers, primarily from the West. And for example, in the summertime, that's when people it's commonly accepted that people take vacation. So July, August, and then come September, they've got to go back to school, they've got to go back to work. So this is relevant to your question because we were forewarned that you get to know the refugees, you work with them closely, very intimately. I mean, it's an emotional setting given what they have undergone. It's very heavy. And they sort of forewarn you that if you become close to them, and believe it or not, they all have access to cell phones and smartphones, and they have their Facebook accounts and Instagram accounts, and they say, well, if you spend a month or two there as a volunteer and you get close to them, and then they call it the revolving door, and then you have to leave, and you get immersed back into your busy, Western society sort of lives, that you need to be very careful that you are now then inadvertently causing them to experience attachment and subsequent detachment all over again, the way they did with their family and friends in the Middle East before they moved to Europe. And so they said, be very careful when, your time here is finite, that when you leave and you say, we're going to remain close friends on Facebook or via social media platforms, and then, as I mentioned, you re-immerse into your old life and you get busy and you sort of forget about them, it doesn't really make any difference or have any impact on your life, but it can adversely impact them seriously. So they said, be careful about that. And they also said, because by virtue of the fact that you're volunteering here, you've voluntarily paid airfare, in many cases you're paying for your own lodging, just to help others philanthropically out of the goodness of your own heart. But these people will, in the course of conversation, will appreciate that you're of greater means and greater resources, and may try to, not in a sinister way, but ask you for material help in some way. Can you fill out forms for me? Can you provide me money? Can you help me because my family is experiencing very dire circumstances back in the home country, or maybe you got separated on the journey over and they're in another European country and I need help. And they said, be very careful, because it is admirable that you, out of a sense of compassion, that you want to help these people, but these people, the amount of help that they need it's sort of a bottomless pit, because their lives are in a very precarious position. So if you give one person, let's say $5, what happens if other refugees find out about that? We're supposed to treat everybody equally and help them all. You can't give everybody $5, but then what happens if a refugee comes back to you and says, I need 10 or 15, and you see where I'm going with this pattern. So they said, we need to be very careful about maintaining our humanity and our compassion and not being robotic about it. It's perfectly natural for two people who are working closely together, and one is a mentor of sorts, to get close. But by the same token, we do want to draw a line. Maybe it's not a hard, black, bold-faced line, but a line where there is a separation between, they are refugees, but that's not all they are. Just because we ascribe that status to them, they still have hopes and dreams and desires just like us. But we do want to have some separation or delineation between those who are trying to help or provide care and those who are receiving it. Because if we blur the lines too much, it will inadvertently elicit complexities which will be hard for the refugees to deal with emotionally. Ultimately, in other words, we're looking at it from their perspective, right? The first rule is do no harm. And if we think that we're doing good, but we, unwittingly make their lives more challenging from a physical health or emotional health perspective or standpoint, that's something to be avoided. I was teaching English to the kids but I also taught sports, which was basically soccer, and it was great to get the kids outdoors in a sort of friendly, hospitable setting where they could just be children. I mean, kids love to be outdoors and run around and playing games and smiling and laughing. And I remember, because soccer is the most popular sport in the world, including in the Middle East, people don't generally think of it that way. And so many of these kids, it was nice because when you get them in a classroom setting with English, for example, they may be shy because they feel like they can't pronounce words, or they don't know enough, or they frankly may think, why do I need to learn English? They didn't really learn it in their home countries, and just because they've gravitated to Greece, for example. But whereas sports and games are more universal. So to get them out there and just, again, being for a moment or for an hour, for them to forget that they don't know, they live in a refugee camp where the conditions may be sort of squalid, to be honest. They're separated from their family members. They're in a foreign society where people don't speak their language. They don't serve their food. They don't know when they're getting out. They don't know where, the economic viability for their parents is going to come from next. And so that was wonderful. Just to hear, I know it probably sounds incredibly trite, but to hear the smiles and laughter of children is just extraordinary. And some of them, I should mention, said to me point blank, they said, I remember next to my home in my village in Afghanistan, for example, there was a little dirt patch, and we would roll up, tape or something, and that was a makeshift soccer ball. We had a team, and it reminds me of my friends who I haven't seen in 9 months. We had a team name. I haven't played soccer since then. So that was extraordinary. So that was the regular event, sort of on a weekly basis. My wife actually had a wonderful idea that the managers of the community center had never conceived on their own. And that was that we decided to sort of create an event on a Friday night, so leading into the weekend where things were sort of casual and laid back, that in terms of these kids getting language instruction or understanding better the local geography of the Greek island they were living in, and then their parents getting legal instruction, that these are people too. And I know that that's not meant to sound patronizing, but sometimes we ascribe the word refugee to them, and we think that that's all that they are. And their social DNA is just like ours. On a Friday night after a week of work or a week of school, they want to do the exact same things as us. They put their pants on one leg at a time, so to speak, just like us. They want to be with their friends. They want to hear music. They want to dance. They want to eat some good food. They want to watch a movie, something of that ilk. My wife came up with the idea in terms of their trying to alleviate their psychosocial needs, so to speak, that why don't we host a talent show, which we actually did. And everything was makeshift in terms of the stage and the seating and the audio visual equipment. Why don't we have these kids on a Friday night just so they can have fun in a healthy, wholesome way and blow off some steam? And oh, by the way, a lot of them come from, we take for granted in the West diversity and multiculturalism and different languages and different food and different music, etc. And for them, a lot of them had never, before they became refugees, never left their hamlets in Syria or Afghanistan. So we said, this is a way to also not only for us to see them as full human beings and not just this narrow status of refugees, but also for them to mingle with each other outside the asylum, the legal aid classroom instruction setting, or the English language class setting, where they could get to know each other sort of as people. So we had them get together and we advertised it, and we sponsored it, we provided food and beverages, and we said, you can do whatever you want. You can sing, you can dance, you can read a poem, it can be in your native language. We will have translators on hand. We will explain to people that people want to highlight or demonstrate or illustrate things from their culture, to showcase it in something that provides them happiness. So if you're from a different culture and somehow the performance offends your religious or cultural sensibilities, please realize we're in a unique situation. All of us are here in Greece, and it's multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multicultural, and people just want to perform and demonstrate something from their native land. And I have to tell you, the way it went off was extraordinary. Some of the Greek volunteers and managers said that it was one of the most touching and gripping evenings of their lives. Because for them, I think they figured out something or realized something that my wife and I already had, that we get so caught up in the fact that they are refugees, and we don't see them as people with a common humanity who get common joy. And to see them laughing, singing, dancing, reciting poetry, reading, paragraphs or passages from plays that they're writing on the side in the community center or in the camps, that was extraordinary happiness and fun and joy all the way around outside of the traditional setting. It was really a sight to behold. It is very shocking, and it does present some challenges, because all of a sudden people are exposed to a new mode of life and they get immersed in local Greek culture. And I think that then, for example, in a camp where they're very cramped quarters, and the Greek authorities are kind of barely keeping a lid on the whole thing or preventing it from erupting into chaos. The men, for example, sometimes, I'm not tarring all of them negatively, say, well, I can get away with, we're not in our home countries where they have very strict rules that are enforced not only by the law or legal entities, but by society, right? In those countries, if your neighbor, if the wife is home alone, you may not go visit. There's very strict rules governing the interaction between men and women who are not related by blood. And all of a sudden they say, well, we're now in a different society. We're in Greece. So I don't have to observe or follow those formal or informal codes of behavior. So I can behave towards women in a more open and free way. It's almost like it doesn't count. So there are a lot of challenges where women say that they have to be on greater guard because they are cramped quarters, so they're not used to living so close or interacting, where there are common showers, there are common bathrooms. So there's all of a sudden a type of interaction physically that they're not used to. So the women have talked about how they have to raise their guard. They have to make sure that their guard is even stronger and more effective. There are cases of, even before they arrive, for example, the smugglers who help facilitate their arrival, trying to manipulate and take advantage of them, unfortunately sexually and otherwise. So there are a lot of unique and special challenges that the women have to take into consideration to protect themselves. It's actually a bit counterintuitive. In a lot of cases, we were sort of lay people. We follow what's going on politically, in the world and in the Middle East specifically, and we thought that they were escaping, Al-Qaeda or ISIS or the ruthless authoritarian government, which is persecuting their particular religious sect or community, etc. In a lot of cases, that's sort of at a macro level, and the surprising part is you learn and discover that in many cases, it's a reason at the much more micro level that there's some reason why their family is in danger because of just a conflict with a neighbor or a community or tribal elder, or there's some real estate dispute, or there's some financial transaction that went awry, and they perceive either their life as an individual or that of their family to be in danger. And that the only escape, because in those societies, they don't necessarily have that mobility. I mean, you hypothetically might think effortlessly of someday moving from Durham, North Carolina to Charlotte. And they don't think, well, I can move 2 hours away and pick up my life and start from scratch and get a job and get a home. They think that there's a physical element of danger incorporated into that scenario, and they really need to flee. So we were surprised at that. Non-Syrians, it was because there was some issue at the micro level where they felt compelled to flee. For the Syrians, in many cases, it was because they were afraid of the rise and control of ISIS in their neighborhoods, or the threat from the Syrian government. For example, we met one refugee whose parents were, she's a 25-year-old girl whose parents were very politically active against the Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria. Her and her sisters adopted that mentality from their parents, and her father was forcibly removed from their home randomly one day by the Syrian security services, and he hasn't been heard from in over 3 years, and their family doesn't know whether he is alive or dead. So they fled because they just perceived it was unsafe. Now, I will tell you, I know this isn't a directly part of your question, but I think this is an interesting element. In some cases, the refugees are fleeing because they belong to a particular sect where they either they're starting to be persecuted, or they fear it, and therefore they want to flee and escape. The division of the government that adjudicates asylum request cases and ultimately decides whether they grant asylum will coach refugees through the pro bono legal services to say that in order for you to be granted asylum into Greece, you actually can't just say that my country is dangerous, or that my country's economy is in the tank and I can't find a viable livelihood there, and therefore I've come to Greece. Ironically, Greece's economy is one of the worst in Europe, so that's a whole different situation. But they say that I can't find sustenance, and so I need to come here. The Greek authorities will not grant asylum under those scenarios. They will say that you have to demonstrate, and not just by telling a compelling story verbally, through documentation, that either yourself or your family members are experiencing some kind of basically existential danger that is forcing you to leave your home and to leave your native country. It's very narrow, and they ask for concrete proof. And absent you demonstrating that in a verifiable way, the default is to deny an asylum request. So we always encourage refugees that, we never encourage them to lie or to fabricate, but we say, make sure that you have your story straight and that it's honest, and that you realize these are the criteria for you to receive asylum. So if you concoct something just to dupe a Greek government official, be very careful, because there are so many refugees who are flooding over, and they're already, political conversations taking place about how many we can take and from which countries and under what conditions. And so they will scrutinize your story and your case very carefully. And again, the default is if the evidence doesn't check out, or if you say, sorry, I don't have any tangible evidence to provide, you're just going to have to believe my sob story, they're going to be inclined not to believe it. Because I think with those constraints on numbers, they want to reward, so to speak, asylum to those that have very legitimate proof and legitimate cases. A lot of people are fleeing because they want I know this sounds borderline patronizing or condescending, but I don't think we fully appreciate that they want the same things in life that we want. Health and stability and security and jobs and good schools for their kids. And so that's a message that we need to amplify and highlight. And that's why we do need to organize a media campaign so that we can fully appreciate who they are and what they want in life, and so that we can provide assistance. And without that, we fall prey, or we become victims to the negative stereotypes that they come. I think one of the big distinctions between post-World War II refugees is those refugees that were displaced were coming from Europe. They were Caucasian, they were Christian, they shared same linguistic roots and cultural roots. So there wasn't this fear that, Europe literally has been blown up. So somebody in France, if they want to come to the United States, that they're going to set off bombs. It's this whole fear of a particular culture, religion, and way of life. And I think that we need to highlight that, again, that these are people too, and the conditions that they're fleeing are extraordinarily harsh, and the world has globalized in so many ways, right? If we can't just embrace the good things of globalization, that, we have, foreign entertainment and foreign goods and services and foreign foods and all these things that we benefit from. But then the foreigners themselves, that when they want to integrate because they are fleeing trauma and danger, that then we say, well, oh no, well, we can't have that. So I think for all those reasons, it's extraordinarily critical for the media to talk about, and I think to talk about refugees and to demonstrate, maybe through individual refugees. When we look at them collectively, we worry, oh, it's such a large number that it will overwhelm or swamp our social services. Or we worry, oh, if there's such a large number, then even if you take a small percentage that are bad seeds or bad apples that are terrorists, they can cause mayhem. Well, how many people, and you used the example earlier with volunteer teachers, you're right, how many people can travel to Eastern Europe and meet these people? Not many. So that's why the media plays such a critical role in bringing that to my living room through my television, through a YouTube video on my computer, and maybe anecdotally highlighting individual stories, and help you sort of digest or get a better understanding of that these are people that have the same hopes, dreams, desires, concerns, fears, nightmares as the rest of us. And therefore we have an obligation, I believe, to help them as people who are fortunate to live very secure, stable, financially rewarding lives, but also morally to share, to use our compassion and to help fellow human beings. And that's why I think, for example, a movie like Parallel Parking is very important, because it narrows it down to one individual and that person's story. And I think it becomes more tangible that way than just some large swath of people coming from a region that you don't know. It's the same reason why we have compassion for our individual neighbors, because we know them well, we interact with them. And that's why I think Parallel Parking, besides being entertaining, is providing a wonderful service in this regard. So thank you to the producers, Abhi Rao and Preeti Widwals, for that.